Alrighty, guys. Thank y'all for bearing with me. I had to get some stuff ready to go here. We've got some bad weather on my end, so if we have any connectivity issues, I apologize. Just bear with me because it's nasty weather down here in Southeast Alabama. But today, nonetheless, we are excited because we've got a great show. I'm excited because we're delving into our first in-depth Air America foray to learn a little bit about what it's like to fly for them and a little bit about their history. So, and before we start, and I hand it over to our guest, I have linked some stuff into the show notes to help you with some Air America history and some stories that actually have been covered for a documentary that Mr. Bill is in. So, and a link to his book, Air America, which he is speaking about today. A CIA super pilot spills the beans, Air America, by Captain Bill Collier. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Bill and let him get us started for today. Mr. Bill, thank you for joining us, and I hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Bud. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for putting all this together. I'm impressed. Okay, my name is Bill Collier. I was a captain with the Marine Corps and flying H-34s. You can see in the background, I have my old Idaho license plate. It says UH-34D, my favorite machine. And I flew those in Vietnam for the Marine Corps. And then I went back to the US of A in Southern California. I was there for 18 months, and I again flew the H-34 there. And I did not want to go back to Vietnam, and I just decided I didn't want to make the Marine Corps a career. So when my contract, I had a reserve contract, and when my contract was up in December of '68, I got out of the Marine Corps. I did not want to go back to the war. And if I had gone back, I would have gone on the H-46, which I didn't like that machine. So another long story. But as I got out, I wanted to be an airline pilot. But the airlines were filling pilots by the droves. I had one friend in my reserve squadron who was hired, trained, put on the line, and furloughed by 3 consecutive airlines all in a row. The 3 majors, I think it was Pan Am and maybe Northwest Orient at the time. I don't remember, but I know it was TWA, Pan Am, and United, I think. They were just not hiring. So a friend and I hired an employment agency to send our resume all around the world. And we got lots of rejections from lots of airlines all around the world because the recession in '68 and '69 was all around the world. But I did get a response from a small company called Air America. And I knew that was the CIA because I had seen it in Vietnam. And I had no desire to go back to the war. I just had my fill of the war and didn't want to go back. But about 50 months, I bumbled around into '69. I spent the summer of Alaska flying civilian helicopters on the North Slope for the oil companies to explore the bids for the track so they could make bids on the oil, which eventually turned into that big oil pipeline project and all that oil, Valdez oil spill and all that jazz. But I was in the beginning of that, in the exploration phase. But then when I got home from Alaska, I had a telegram waiting for me if I was interested in flying helicopters in Southeast Asia to call this number in DC. And the telegram's actually in my book. And I blocked out the phone number, of course. But, and I thought about it for a while. So finally, in the meantime, I had been corresponding with my very best friend, Gary Conley. We called him Cons. Cons was my best buddy ever. And I was corresponding with him, and he had signed up immediately after getting the telegram. And he had been working for 6 months. So we were corresponding. And he kept saying, Bill, come over, good Bill. And okay, so finally, I decided I should give it a try. So I called Air America and the DC number. First, they didn't know who I was because I'd been sitting on that telegram for months, from October until almost June the next year. So that was more than 6 months. But they did hire me. They put me through a bunch of qualification things. I had to take a physical. And believe it or not, I had to go take this massive airline exam called a STA9, which used to be the standard, the ultimate standard for what you had to pass to be an airline pilot. So I guess I passed because they hired me. Maybe they hired me because I failed. You never know. Maybe they were looking for some standard guys. Anyway, the Air America had H-34s, which I now had 750 hours of combat experience in Vietnam. And they hired a whole bunch of my contemporaries. At that time, in the late 60s, early 70s, Air America was going through a big hiring. They hired about 40 of my contemporaries from Vietnam. Most of them guys that I knew either in Vietnam or in flight school or in reserves. So it was like old home week. All these old friends kept showing up and we got to fly together. And we all knew each other's backgrounds. And we all knew we could depend on each other to help each other out in time of a pinch. And by gosh, it did work. My friend Gary Cons, he actually pulled my ass out of a crack one day when I was flying kind of jumping the gun here, but when I was flying with Air America, we did a insert of putting local troops out into this remote, quiet village, abandoned village, because it had been threatened by the North Vietnamese, so all the people left. And the minute we touched down in the landing zone, our engine quit and just ate itself. And my friend Cons came down and rescued me. And we weren't under fire, we weren't getting mortared, but the potential was very strong. Anyway, getting back, taking a big step backward to the beginning, I got into Thailand in June of 70. And at that time, the background of Air America was in 1962 or abouts, the Laotian people were worried about being taken over by the North Vietnamese. So they asked the United States for help. The United States sent a squadron of Marine Corps H-19s, the predecessor to the H-34. And they had the whole squadron sitting there, and they were helping the Laotians fight off the North Vietnamese. Well, eventually what happened was somewhere along the way, Air America acquired that helicopter squadron, and then they transferred over to H-34s, which was a much better machine than the H-19. H-19 was way underpowered. H-34 just barely powered enough. So, and then what happened was when the North Vietnamese created the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they displaced 300,000 native Laotian people. Think of people on the cover of National Geographic magazine, not quite bones in their noses, but black pajamas, conical hats, and they had almost no metal. They had machetes, they had cooking pots, and the men there somehow were able to take strips of iron and wrap them around a rod of steel and heat it in their forges. And they actually created single-shot flintlock rifles that you had to pull the hammer back, and then the hammer would strike a piece of quartz, would create a spark, which would light the gunpowder, which would fire. And it wasn't very high powered, but it was good for shooting birds and monkeys. And this is one of the things they used for procuring their food out in the jungles of Laos. So the United States government took it upon itself to support these 300,000 displaced villagers, because they knew if they stayed on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they would either be enslaved or just plain outright murdered by the North Vietnamese, and nobody wanted that. So they moved west and they created whole new villages. The problem with the slash and burn agriculture that they did was that they would have to go to a field and chop down all the trees and then wait for them for a couple of years for all the brush and trees and stuff to dry out enough to burn. And then they would burn it. And that would create some ash because the soil was very, very poor on these hillsides. But because they had just moved, there weren't any fertile fields for them to grow in. So that's why we supported them for years. And they kept moving around, because even a field when they did slash and burn agriculture, it was only good for 2 or 3 years. And then all the nutrition was depleted from the soil. So we kept supporting. I hauled, there were weeks when I did nothing but haul bag after bag after bag, 100-kilo bags, 220-pound bags of rice, probably maybe 10 or 20 of them out to different villages all around central Laos. And but if you can find that map and put that up, the Ho Chi Minh displaced all the people, and the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong sort of controlled the eastern half of Laos, and the locals and Air America controlled the western. If you kind of draw a line right down the middle of Laos, can I do that with mine? Yeah, I don't know if you can see my pepper, but just right down the middle of Laos. Then the right half, upper right half was enemy, and the lower left half was friendly. Now, if you look at this map, upper left is a place called Hui's Eye. Below that, Pak Bang, and then over to the right of that is Luang Prabang. And then down below is the red star is the Vientiane, the capital of Laos. And then about 45 degrees to the right and lower is Savannah Ket. And then way down at the bottom right is Pak Se. Those were our major bases. At each major base, the company had a hostel. So we would go there, we would work 6 days on and 1 day off. 6 days on, 1 day off, 6 days on. And then after 3 of those rotations, we got an entire week off. We got R&R every month for you former G guys, eat your livers. We got R&R every month. And we also had airline benefits. So we could go up to the travel office upstairs at the office complex at Air America at Udon and just go to the travel agent and say, hey, here's what I want a ticket. I want to go here and there, or whatever. Sometimes we just get blank tickets and just fill them out and fill them out as we go. Because we like to go, my good buddy Cons and I like to go to Bangkok. And we love Bangkok and we love Hong Kong. We spent a lot of time in Hong Kong too. But we also discovered that Pan Am had Flight 1 and Flight 2. I think Flight 1 went west and I think Flight 2 went east, or vice versa. I never remembered which. But they both left Bangkok about midnight. So we'd get our stuff together. We'd go to the airport and we'd go on whichever flight we wanted to go on. And in those days, the planes weren't very full. And as soon as people got on the planes, they would fall asleep because it was midnight. It was maybe 12:30 by the time we took off. So all the stewardesses, now known as flight attendants, would go in the back and they'd be sitting around chatting in groups because they had nothing to do. So my friend Gary Cons and I would go back to the restroom or whatever and introduce ourselves to some of the young ladies. And by the time we got to their next layover, we had dates. So by the time we got to Beirut, for instance, one time, we got to do 3 or 4 days in Beirut and had a great time. That was before the all the turmoil there where it all got blown up. It was a much better, safer place. They had a great casino, and they had the Phoenicia Hotel was like this gigantic Roman villa with a humongous pool. And on the deep end of the pool was a gigantic plate glass window where you could sit down below in the hotel and see into the swimming pool. So we could sit in the bar and look into the swimming pool, watch all the young girls swimming around. That was a treat. And here I am with 2 of my friends sitting at the pool at the Siam Intercontinental in Bangkok. Those 2 girls are stewardesses for Trans-International Airlines. I dated the short dark hair one. I dated her for months. She lived in San Francisco. So when I came back after America, we dated quite a while. So anyway, our job was just to bring supplies to all these people. And we bought chickens and pigs and iron and pots and pans and whatever was provided. I know at one time I spent a couple of days hauling canned beef stroganoff. And another time I spent days hauling bags and bags and bags of dehydrated milk, dried powder milk. And I'd haul it out to the villages. We'd unload a load here and a load there and a load there. And then the villagers would all come and take it away. Well, what I found out later was that the Laotian people have lactose intolerance. They couldn't handle the dried milk products, so they'd feed it to their pigs. And then they also, when they tried to open up and eat the cans of the, lobster Newburgh, some big company in the United States donated case after case after case of cans of lobster Newburgh. Well, the Laotian people couldn't tolerate that in their systems either. It was way too rich, made them sick. So they fed that to their pigs. They had healthy pigs until there was a guy named Pop Buell who came in from Iowa or Ohio and worked for the Peace Corps. And he started teaching the Laotian people how to grow healthier pigs. And he imported Durox from Iowa. And the problem is he also imported trichinosis because the Laotian people had been eating their pork raw for millennia, but now suddenly had to deal with trichinosis, so then they had to start cooking their food. So there were some comical, unusual aspects of all the stuff we did, but we were doing our best. We thought we were doing well. In the meantime, the North Vietnamese were still trying to take over Laos, and they were pushing down, trying to push down through the center of Laos from North Vietnam and the panhandle of Laos. And there was a base there called Long Tieng. There was a secret CIA base at Long Tieng. This is one of the busiest airports in the world at the time. We had more operations than most major airports, had more aircraft coming and going. It was the only entirely Air America or another company called Continental Air Services. And then later on, there's a little company called Bird Air, and they were doing some minor work too. So all these civilian companies were in and out of theirs, the secret CIA base at Long Tieng. Now, if you look at this, that's the runway, but it's highlighting, and the big black lumps there, those are called limestone karsts, K-A-R-S-T, the geographical feature of limestone mountains. And the whole base is down in a bowl. So when the big airplanes were coming in, the airstrip was about 2,600 feet long. It was paved. And when the big planes like the C-130s would bring in the supplies, they had to be in a descent to get down into this bowl. But at the end of their descent, they had to flare and add power and start a slight climb because the runway sloped up. The only way to land was uphill. But if you landed too long, there was that karst at the end of the runway. So all the pilots had to be really good to get the C-130s, the DC-3s, the DC-7s, the DC-6s. I think even C-123s went in there, and later on, C-130 is as big as we got. And they would bring in supplies, because if you look on the left of the base there, on the upstream upper left of the corner of the picture, there's a ridgeway further up, but way up there, right there, that then go to the left. That ridgeway was called Life Skyline Ridge. It created the skyline looking up from the secret base at Long Tieng, and it had 6 outposts along it. Each one was called Charlie something, Charlie Delta, Charlie X-ray, Charlie, whatever. And each of one of those bases was a artillery outpost where the local people had defenses to protect that ridge and then subsequently protect the CIA base at Long Tieng from the North Vietnamese who were coming south. So a lot of our work, after I finished 2 years of flying the H-34 and doing all the resupplying, and we did some stuff. We did a lot we called and extractions. And what that was with the local people, we supported the local army, and they would want to know what's going on out there. And very contrary to what we saw in Vietnam, all of the Laotians hated communism. They hated the North Vietnamese. There was no question about someone's loyalty or someone being a spy or someone working for the other side at night, like we had in Vietnam all the time. The Laotian people were very anti-North Vietnamese. So we would take these teams out and drop them somewhere, and then they would snoop and poop around and gather intel and bring it back to the base or radio in for airstrikes, whatever they thought was appropriate. And then when they were done with their job, then we'd go out and pick them up. And we had this very high-tech, very complicated system, and I'm being very sarcastic, a system for signaling, communicating with them on the ground. So they didn't have radios, and we didn't have their language. They didn't have our language. So they were provided 2 1-foot by 6-foot strips of very bright orange cloth, like you see on traffic cones, but it was made of silk, and they're very light and very easy to pack. So when we got to some spot to pick up an infill team, we'd circle. We'd have the coordinates. We know where they were supposed to be, and we'd circle overhead, and they would lay out those strips of orange cloth and create a signal. Now, whatever kind of signal you can make with 2 strips of orange cloth. So it could be an L, could be an X, could be a V, could be a I or T. So those are the signals we looked for. And if we saw the proper signal on the ground at the proper place, then we'd spiral down very carefully all the way looking for unusual activity. And hopefully, if it can go slow enough, if it got shot at, we could fly away. I never had that happen. Every time we went down and had the signal from the proper troops and got the proper signal, and it was valid, and we got them out and picked them up and to go home with their intel information, or the intelligent people. And that was exciting because I probably did one of these on average once a day the whole time I was at Air America. Sometimes I did as many as 10 in one day. We'd be moving troops from, say, point A to point B. And it was fun. It was exciting. And the best part was we got paid extra for doing these missions because they were on the side of being more dangerous. And in those days, the pay was $50 per landing or $50 per hour, whichever was greater. Now, one day I did 10 landings in about an hour, so I got paid like $600 for an hour's work there. That was fun. So we were making really good money. I like to say that Air America was a 50 times better job than working for the Marine Corps in Vietnam because it was 1/10 of the risk and 5 times the pay. Adjusting for inflation, and I found a calculator online where you can adjust for inflation. And in those days, I was making almost 40,000 a year. And in 1970, 71, 72, that was big bucks. We were making as much money as the Pan Am captains. And adjusted for inflation, that was more than $250,000 in today's money. But you know what? I just had a friend who retired for flying for petroleum helicopters out of Louisiana onto the offshore platforms. And he'd been with them for 36 accident-free years. And they offered him $1,000 a day to stay on. And he just refused. He wanted to retire. But $1,000 a day was about what I was making at Air America. So, and Jim was only just flying offshore. I was flying in combat. So I should have been making more, right? No, well, never mind. Had fun. So we had a lot of really interesting missions supporting all the people. And then in mid-72, a very strange thing happened. I got a call back. We usually went out for 6 days. I've only been out for 2 days, and I got a report on when I checked in every night for my schedule, they would tell me what to do for the next day. Usually I would go to one of the company hostels at one of those bases I listed earlier. And in Vientiane, we had a small hotel called the Apollo Hotel, which we stayed at. That it wasn't real first class, but it was the best hotel in all of Laos. And usually I was working north of Vientiane, and I expected to get just orders to stay overnight and do the same thing again tomorrow. But this particular day in June of 72, I got an order to return to base. Well, that was concerning and creating a little question in my mind about why am I being recalled? I haven't done anything wrong. My airplane is fine. I'm doing well. I'm a bachelor and an orphan. I don't have any families to worry about. So what's going on here? So as I headed south towards Udon, Thailand, where our main base was for Air America helicopters, I began to hear everybody else checking in, and we used to check in every 15 minutes, and that way we knew where everybody was. If someone was working our area, we knew where they were in our area, so we'd watch out for them. But most places we worked, we were pretty much single plane, single pilot, did not have a co-pilot in the H-34, except during those dicey missions when we did inserts and extracts. Then we would have 2 pilots in case one of us got shot. So I'm heading for home. I get back to the base, and every aircraft Air America owned is back at the base. The whole entire parking ramp is chock-a-block with aircraft. A lot of grass out in between the runway and the taxiway in the Air Force Base has got aircraft in it. They're parking them everywhere because everybody has been recalled. And as soon as we landed, we were given orders to go to the base theater for secret briefing. Okay, so at 6 o'clock, we went to the base theater, and there was a guy in there with one of those wands, and he's checking for electronic bugs. This was really spooky. And then finally the meeting starts. They posted guards at the doors. They wouldn't allow anybody to come or go. Now it's really getting interesting. So then we got this brief, and I have to flash back to Vietnam, 1966. I was flying around I Corps in Vietnam. And I was aware that the U.S. military had the Sidewinder heat-seeking missile. And I said to myself at that time, all the enemy has to do is modify that heat-seeking missile and make it portable, and they can start blowing helicopters out of the sky left to right, and this war will be over. But prophetic thinking on my part, because later on, this is what was happening. This is what the secret brief was about. The enemy had been shooting the missiles in Vietnam for some time. We all knew it was only a matter of time until these missiles came to Laos, and then we'd start shooting our Air America aircraft down. And that's what the briefing was about. The enemy had been reported to have the Strela H heat-seeking missile in our neighborhood. There's a picture off of Wikipedia. And so now we're all really concerned. Oh my God, we're going to get shot down. And so then at that point, I made what was probably a dumb decision, because at that point, the company decided, by then it was getting so dangerous now with the heat-seeking missile being a factor. The company had been flying in every aircraft. Every helicopter that went out always had 2 guys in it. And that's costing them a lot of money to pay 2 captains instead of 1 captain and 1 first officer. So the company decided to save money. They would take all the junior captains and bust them back to first officer. Well, I was junior enough, I got caught up in that. So then I became a first officer again, damn it, after 2 years of being a captain. And but I decided at that point that I had a choice. I was given a choice. I could continue flying co-pilot for H-34s with a bunch of guys that some of them I didn't think were very good pilots, or I could do something new and exciting. I could go learn to fly Hueys and be co-pilot in Hueys. So I chose to fly Hueys, not giving a thought to the fact that the Huey has a higher signature than the H-34 and be more susceptible to heat-seeking missile. Plus the Huey work the Hueys were doing on that skyline ridge I mentioned earlier, where all the artillery emplacements were. The main job for the Hueys was to support those troops, local troops up there on Skyline Ridge, and to bring them food and water and ammunition and support whatever they needed, medevacs and etc. There's one of the pads. I think that's Charlie X-ray. And that's not me landing, but I took that picture. And that's an H-34. The helipads were really big. They could actually land up hellacious porters, and the small airplanes up there on that little dirt strip. The pilots were really good. So then I was flying Hueys. Our primary job, almost all day, every day, we'd go to the secret base at Long Tieng, and the C-130s would bring in pallets and pallets and pallets of mostly artillery shells. And we would just transport and go up and down and up and down and up and down all day long, sometimes more than 11 hours a day, taking turns flying. Every fuel load, we switched off, and one guy would fly the right seat and fly all the legs, and then we'd switch off for the next leg. And so for every other leg, I could just sit there and do the paperwork, which is just keeping track of the time off and time back. And so we did that, and we supplied these poor troops up there in the field. And we also took them food. And also on the cover of my book is all right, there it is. We carried water buffalo up to the troops in the field, because they had this pagan or animist religion that part of it was, I think, twice a year, they had to sacrifice a live water buffalo. They couldn't have a dead one. We couldn't haul a dead one up there. It had to be live. And you can't just stuff a water buffalo into the back of a helicopter, because he would get scared. He would throw his arms around and tear stuff apart. His hooves would tear stuff apart. And he was heavy, and he would move around, throw the balance out of balance. He'd fall, crash, and die. So the CIA came up with the idea of putting those cargo nets on the ground. Then they took the buffalo and led him over to the middle of the cargo net, and then shot him with a tranquilizer dart. He would then collapse into the net. The troops would gather up the 4 corners of the net and put him on a common hook, and then hook it onto our external load hook on our Huey. So we carried these live water buffalo up to the troops in the field. And as soon as we got him there, usually by the time we got him loaded and carried up there, was 20, 30 minutes later. And the water buffalo would be recovering from the tranquilizer, and he'd be scared to death. He'd be bellowing like a crazy banshee. But then we'd land him there. The local troops would undo him from the net, lead him over somewhere, and guess what? They'd kill him. So it almost didn't seem worthwhile to bring him up there alive. That's what they wanted, and so that's what they got. So after a while, late 70s, the North Vietnamese got very, very aggressive. And they were coming down across the plain of Jars. If anybody doesn't know what the plain of Jars is, Google that. In the middle of Laos is a plain that's about 4,000 feet above sea level. It's about 40 miles square or in diameter, circular shaped. I'm not sure the shape of it, roughly a square. And scattered all around this plain are literally thousands of gigantic stone jars. Some of them are 6 feet high and 3 or 4 feet wide, and they weigh as much as 6,000 pounds. And they are there, and some had lids, and the lids were off. Whatever was in the jars, nobody knows. They probably were burial urns, but nobody knows for sure what they were. They've been there a long, long time, so long that the local people don't even have legends about where these jars came from. And there they are. You can see them there. And I don't think I ever actually saw one of these myself because I never got far out into the plain. But they were there, and that's why it's called the Plain of Jars. And the North Vietnamese had taken over the Plain of Jars and were headed south. They were headed for secret CIA base at Long Tieng. They knew if they could get to the secret CIA base at Long Tieng, they could kick out the CIA and all the airplanes, and then they could take over all of Laos. And that's what they wanted. So the Laotian people held that ridge, and just between the Plain of Jars and the Charlie Ridge was another small ridge. The North Vietnamese army was built for plains warfare. They weren't ready for mountain warfare, and they had very little water source. They had very low on food. So by the time they fought their way across the Plain of Jars, over the first ridge, and then hit the second ridge at Long Tieng, they just were beat, tired, whipped, and they had no water. Water is so important to troops in the field because you get really thirsty when you're humping up and down mountains and fighting in combat and all that. So they were weakened, but they did manage to fight their way up to the top of Charlie Ridge and take over a couple of the outposts. But the local troops up there were able to repel them and push them back down the other hill. Way off to the left side of the Plain of Jars, if you're looking from south to north, there was one very small dirt road that came over the mountain from the valley north and came down into Long Tieng. And the North Vietnamese actually got 2 tanks onto that road and were driving them down that dirt road into Long Tieng. It's very steep. It's very steep on both sides, steep on the mountainside where on their left as they're coming down, and a cliff on the right side. So it was a very narrow track. And fortunately, the CIA case officer in support of that area took the precaution of putting a couple of anti-tank mines on that road, blew up 2 tanks, and totally blocked the road and stopped the North Vietnamese from coming down that road with more tanks and their troops. And then, to make things even worse, the North Vietnamese were just on the other side of the Skyline Ridge. They had an entire regiment there getting ready to climb over the hill and take over the base. When the CIA case officer in that area, maybe the same guy, I don't know, it was all very compartmentalized. He called in a B-52 arc light strike, and we dropped hundreds, literally hundreds of 250-pound bombs on that North Vietnamese regiment and just turned it into mincemeat. It was sad for them. And the general of the regiment survived, but he took one look at all the damage from all the bombs and he said to his troops, "Screw it, we're done, let's go home." Took his troops and marched them back to North Vietnam. So that was the end of the assault on the secret CIA base at Long Tieng. And that was late 72. In the meantime, all the peace accords were going on, and they were talking about this and that and trying to make peace. And finally, in 73, early 73, they actually did have peace accords. But I was already gone by then, because what happened was somewhere around November of late November, I believe it was, of 72, somebody reported actually seeing one of the handheld heat-seeking missiles shot in Laos somewhere. It didn't hit any of our aircraft, but now we knew for sure the missiles were in our neighborhood. And after we'd had the initial brief, a bunch of my friends were sitting around drinking beer and talking, and deciding what we would do. And we all agreed that once the first missile was shot, we would all quit. We'd made enough money. We didn't need to put our lives on the line anymore. We dealt with mortars and 50 calibers and occasional airbursts in our neighborhood and lots of small arms fire. And then always the threat of being attacked by a satchel charge when you're on the ground at one of the secret bases or getting lured into a false infiltrator pickup, that sort of thing. But we'd all dealt with those risks. But the idea of a heat-seeking missile coming from the ground to your aircraft, you can have just enough time to say, "Oh shit," and you're going to be dead. So finally, when this first missile was fired, two of us, only two of us, it was me, so, my good friend Paul, who now lives in North Carolina, and I both quit. And on New Year's Day, I was done with Air America, New Year's Eve, and I went to Hong Kong and celebrated New Year's Eve at the top of the Apollo Hotel with a beautiful young lady from Nepal. That was fun. But before I left, I had lots of interesting adventures flying for Air America. And I mentioned earlier, the one with the engine quit in the landing zone, and the engine just went poof, and there's a great big cloud of smoke came out of the exhaust and blew back into and through the cockpit. And then we looked at the instruments. All the instruments had gone haywire, and all the warning lights had come on. Something just really went terribly bad with the engine. We found out later it sucked its own impeller seal and swallowed it and ran that into the. Say that again. What? I didn't understand that. Can you help that? Oh, well. Anyway, so that was, and then my friend Gary rescued me, Cons rescued me, and I bought him a beer that night, owed him. So one day, and Bud has posted the link to YouTube about the rescue of Raven 1-1. One day, my friend Dick and I were flying out of the capital, the royal capital of Laos, up in the northwest corner called Long Tieng. Look at it, looks like it should be Luang Prabang, but it's Long Tieng. We call it Long Tieng. And we'd been out just doing routine stuff, resupplying the local Laotian troops in their local outposts. We're headed back. It was the end of the day. We're headed back to the base, airport, civilian airport. And we're just going to land. It's time to go to the bar and get a drink. Heck, it's late in the day. So we were just about to the airport when I began to hear all this radio traffic. A lot of chatter, what's all this talking on the radio? There's nobody should even be working at this hour. They should all be at the bar having a beer. Well, the closer we got, the more we understood that somewhere in the neighborhood, an Air Force 01 Bird Dog Raven had been shot down. There's a book called Air America by Christopher Robbins, and he was the one who writes about the Ravens a lot. My book's better. And so we're hearing all this radio chatter about someone who got shot down, and everybody's trying to figure out where he is, but nobody can get a fix on him because everybody's stepping on each other's radio transmission so badly. Every time we put on the automatic diffraction finder, it would just flop back and forth from whoever was talking next. And so nobody knew which direction to go to rescue this guy. He'd been shot down. He'd been doing recon low and slow over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And then he got shot down. And he was trying to glide. He almost made it. He only had to make it over one more ridgeline. He could have glided all the way to our base, but he couldn't quite make it over that last ridge. And so he picked some tall trees and he put it down as best he could on what looked like a very, very small trail. The airplane was totally destroyed, but he got out with just a broken arm, mildly cracked arm. It wasn't even very badly broken. And his backseater got out too. Neither one were injured more than that. So anyway, I heard this radio traffic, and in all the chatter, I heard the phrase, up a canyon. I said, okay, well, I knew there were canyons up to the north of us. I didn't think there were many canyons much to the south of us. Besides, there wouldn't be any reason for a guy to be to the south of us. So I just turned out of the 6-plane circus that was flying around the airport and turned north. And I flew for just a few minutes, about maybe less than 10 miles from Long Tieng, when I hear on the radio, helicopter, you're right overhead. So I stopped. You can do that in a helicopter. You can stop in a helicopter right in the middle of the sky. And by the time I got stopped, my crew chief said, "I see him, sir." So I hovered there, hovered over a little bit and got down. And we hovered up about 90 foot, above 90-foot tall teak trees. And my crew chief ran the hoist down and hoisted up the local backseat observer from the bird dog, and then put the hoist down again. There's the airplane after the crash. And no one was hurt, believe it or not. And so then we put the hoist down and picked up the Air American U.S. Air Force captain pilot who was driving the thing when he crashed it from being shot down. So I took them both back to the airport. And as I was cooling down my engine and shutting down my helicopter, an ambulance showed up. There's Mike Kelly with his broken arm in a sling, and the two local Laotian pilots on either side of them. Those guys were really good. They were committed, and they were committed for life until the war was over, till they died. A lot of them died. A lot of the Raven guys died. I think there were 128 of them, and I think like 38 of them died during the war. It was a nasty, nasty job. They had to fly low and slow, looking for the enemy, and when they got spotted, the enemy would shoot at them. Anyway, so I'm at the airport, and the ambulance shows up, and they throw these two guys into the ambulance and whisk them away to the hospital. Well, damn, that was frustrating because we had two customs with Air America, with Southeast Asia there. If you rescued somebody, he bought you a bottle of booze. And at the same time, sometimes in a situation like this, you could say to the pilot, "Hey, give me your pistol," and you can say it was lost in the crash. So I could have probably got the guy's pistol too. He had a .38 revolver, I believe. And maybe it was a .45, I don't know. But they got whisked away so fast, I didn't even get a chance to shut my engine off before. And so I just said, "Oh, well, there goes my bottle of booze." I did find out a few days later that Mike Kelly did go to the chief pilot office in Udorn, tried to get me a bottle of booze there, but the chief pilot would not divulge who the pilot was, me. And so I didn't get my bottle of booze. So that was very disappointing for me. So here's a good story. 34 years later, I'm standing on a street corner in Sonoma, California, just north of San Francisco. And I'm standing on a street corner next to the Catholic Church, waiting to go to attend the funeral of one of the CIA case officers that we'd worked with at Long Tieng in northern Laos. Guy's name was Tony Po. Theoretically, he was the inspiration for Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, because he had his own army way up in the northwest corner of Laos, and he was actually paying his troops to cut off ears, and he would pay them for every left ear that they brought in. He finally stopped paying for that because then he began to notice there were a lot of kids in the village who didn't have left ears, and he realized that the parents were cutting off the ears of their kids just to get some money for them. So he stopped paying. But anyway, that was Colonel Kurtz. And so I'm on the street corner, and a guy walks up to me. I have this hat on. He walks up and he says, "Oh, Air America, huh?" "Yeah." "Oh, yeah, well, sure." So we get to talking. He was one of those Raven pilots. He was Raven 1-2. So I said, "Well, you must know Raven 1-1. He says, "Yes, I do." And he put me in contact 34 years later with the guy that I rescued. And he had gone doing that very risky job. When he finished his tour in Asia, he got his choice of assignments in the Air Force. He chose to fly U-2s. He flew to U-2s for the rest of his career, retired, went to Continental Airlines, and then retired from Continental. So by now we're emailing back and forth. Or first I wrote Mike a letter. I said, "Hey, Mike, I think I'm the guy who rescued you. Here's the time and place and details. And P.S., by the way, at the bottom I put, you owe me a bottle of booze." And a few days later, I got a letter back from Mike, and he said, "Yes, I believe you were the pilot who rescued me. And by the way, the check's in the mail." Well, that meant he sent me a bottle of booze, right? Well, he did. He sent me a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. I have the bottle here, but it's not worth digging out. And this is like a $200 bottle of scotch. I love Johnny Walker Black, and I would drink Johnny Walker Red in a pinch, but I never had blue before. So I just happened to be near a liquor store a couple of days later, and I went in and looked, and it was $200 a bottle. And this is 20 years ago. So I couldn't just sit and drink all this beautiful scotch all by myself. So then I contacted Raven 1-2 and Raven 1-1, Mike and Gene, the guy who introduced us, and then my good friend Dennis, who also lived in Santa Rosa, who was also at the funeral. And the four of us got together at my daughter's apartment in San Francisco. We drank that bottle of booze and a couple of other bottles of booze. and several bottles of wine and some champagne and about a wheelbarrow load of Chinese takeout. So we had a lot of fun. And we told stories and told stories and told stories. There's Johnny Walker Blue. And my daughter got it all on videotape. She's a filmmaker. And it was 14 hours of us sitting around from like 1 o'clock till 3 o'clock the next morning. We got it all on video. And there we are toasting my co-pilot, Dick Copey, who died not too long just before this from post-traumatic stress. But Gene on the left and my friend Dennis on the far left, Gene, the guy who introduced us, in the middle of the three, and then on the far right, no, I'm sorry, the guy in the middle on the left is Mike, the guy I rescued. The guy on the far right is Gene Hamner, the guy who introduced us, me to Mike. And of course, that's me in the middle. So we're toasting my co-pilot, Richard Copey, who died from aftermath of post-traumatic stress. You figure that one out on your own. So, but then I took the 14 hours of video and some documentaries and took them to a film editor, and that's where the Rescue of Raven 1-1 on YouTube. That was the result of all of that talk and all of that drinking and all of that storytelling. It was great fun. I'm still in touch with all those guys today, except Dick, of course. So that was fun. That was a good adventure. I had some other adventures while with Air America that were dicey as hell. And 3 of them were with the same guy. It was a senior former Marine who has been one of the original guys with the original Marine Corps squadron that stayed on with Air America. And he was a good pilot. They just happened to have some bad luck sometimes. And one day we were flying from Long Tieng, and every night when we finished our work doing resupplying the troops on Charlie Ridge, we would fly back to Vientiane and stay in the Apollo Hotel. And one night we took off from Long Tieng, and Ted was low on fuel, but he knew he could get fuel at another base about 20 miles south. So we said, okay, we'll go there and get fuel. So as soon as we took off, unfortunately, we got cloud cover underneath us, and we got stuck above the clouds. And then the low fuel light warning light came on. I mean, this is a dicey place to be on top of the clouds with low fuel, because you can't see what's below you. You don't know what you're going to do if the engine quits. Well, I forgot to tell one of the more important parts was when the Strola missile was sighted in our neighborhood, I immediately started carrying a parachute. I would go to the paraloft where they issue such gear, and I would just get a parachute. I would take it out of the helicopter. I'd take out the back seat cushion and put the parachute there. And everybody would scoff at me and laugh at me, but I kind of feel like, well, the chances, if we get hit by one of these missiles, the chance of my making it through the explosion is going to be very, very slow. And the bad habit with Hueys at that time, and I think still, if they get an abrupt shock, they will throw away their entire rotor system, and then it'll snap the shaft, and then the whole helicopter just becomes a grease brick falling out of the sky. I didn't want to have that experience if I could avoid it. So I started carrying a parachute. And everybody scoffed at me and laughed at me. And the amazing part is a few months later, parachutes became mandatory for everybody. So I was a leader in that respect. But we're back to flying over the clouds, and I'm sitting in the back. I'm not flying co-pilot for Ted. I'm a passenger in the back. I'm thinking, oh, crap, we're over the clouds, and we got a low fuel warning. We're like, our engine quits. We're going to go down into the trees. It's going to be nasty. It's the tall teak trees. You crash about 3 times as you crash down through tall teak trees, and they're very hard. So the passenger door was open, and I just was watching over Ted's shoulder, watching the instrument panel and listening to the engine, thinking, well, if I see any indication that the engine has quit, like a turning down of noise or a loss of fuel pressure or turning down of RPM, I'm going to bail out because I have my parachute on. So I watched and watched and watched. It was getting really dicey, and I was really weren't that high. I would have to push myself out of the helicopter, push myself away from the tail rotor, and before I could hit my D-ring and open my parachute, and I don't know how much altitude I'm at, hopefully enough to open the parachute. So finally, at the very last second, there was a little hole in the clouds, and right over the base we were trying to go to, Ted saw the hole, saw the base, descended through it, we got fuel and went home. One night we went back to the base, and this was back when I was still flying H-34s, and the H-34 was parked way down the ramp from the Hueys. And one night I parked my H-34 and I was getting ready to go to the hotel, and I saw the crash trucks down at the far end of the parking ramp. I thought, oh, somebody must have had a hot start or something, no big deal. I found out later in the bar that one of the Huey pilots had come into the revetment and backed into the revetment, and he caught his tail rotor on a lamppost. The shock to the system was so bad that the Huey threw away its rotor system. The whole entire rotor system separated from that Huey, spun off into the sky, and came back down. One of the main rotor blades skewered a co-pilot's seat on another Huey a couple hundred feet away, and the co-pilot had just stepped out of that seat, and he still had his hand on the door handle when that rotor blade skewered his seat. Had he been 2 seconds later getting out of his seat, he would have been cut in half. So anyway, that was an amazing story there. And as it turns out, that pilot got fired for running into the lamppost. He shouldn't have backed up that far. But then the second experience I had with Ted Cash was actually, this is the third one. We were up doing resupply at Mutter Ridge. Very frequently, we'd hear Mayday calls. The Ravens, the Laotian T-28s, or some of the bombers, the U.S. bombers, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, whatever, they were bombing on the plain of Jars. They'd be called in by the forward air controllers. And once in a while we hear Mayday, but usually someone else would get to that person before we could even react. We were always out there ready to save anybody we could. And one day we're up just at the very top of Mutter Ridge. We heard a Mayday. And one of those Raven guys had been shot down, was going to put his airplane down on the elephant grass, which is 13 feet high on the plain of Jars. And so we immediately pulled maximum power and headed for this guy to rescue him. And he's telling us where he is. We're talking to him. He's telling us where he is. He's telling us what he's doing. He's finally telling us, okay, I'm on final. Okay, I've landed. I'm in the grass. Here I am. Come get me. In the meantime, I'm flying co-pilot, so I have got my survival weapon, which is meant just for protecting from tigers. It's an Uzi submachine, 9mm submachine gun. Now also carried a Walther P38 semi-automatic pistol and a sawed-off M1 carbine for survival reasons in case I ran into a tiger. Never know, you might see a tiger out there one day on the ground. So we fly to this place, and we can see the airplane on the ground. And we've been talking to the guy on the ground until he got out of his aircraft. And we know he's on the ground safe. So we fly out there, we see the airplane, and Ted is flying the right seat. He's the pilot. I'm in the left seat. We're making right spirals. So I can't really see what's going on that side. So we make a spiral down, 2 or 3 spirals. We pull up to a hover next to the little aircraft. And the pilot is on the ground, dead. He'd been shot in the head. And we're hovering there. I mean, this is an area where there had to be 8 zillion North Vietnamese Army troops and regiments and battalions and commands, companies. Who knows who was there, who shot this guy. So we didn't even try to recover his body. We just pulled maximum power and got the hell out of there. But every time I tell the story, I still get nervous about it because that was the scariest mission I ever did. Because we knowingly flew into danger, the path of danger, knowing full well there were probably North Vietnamese soldiers all around. But for some reason, they didn't shoot at us. I don't know why. So we went back to the base without event. We did get a letter of commendation from the ambassador, G. McMurtley Godley, for that little mission. And another one we did was, I think the commendation had 2 different missions mixed up. So the day before, we'd gone out to try to rescue another guy, and we got called back right away because someone else beat us to him. And it was a whole list of people on the letter of commendation. As far as I know, we were out there alone. We were so fast. We went there, went down, departed without any backup. But I'm not sure. Ted's no longer with us, and I can't ask him. But the third mission I did with Ted that was kind of scary was flying again out of the secret CIA base at Long Tieng. And the CIA case officer came to us one day and he said, I had this company of troops, and they're out there on the southeast corner of the plain of Jars. They've gotten scared and they're fleeing. Can you go? And they're fleeing. How do you say that? They fleed. I don't know how do you say past tense of flown. Anyway, they'd flown away, and they're on the ground in the jungle in tall trees. Would you go see if you could find them? And it seemed to be a pretty safe area. So Ted said, okay, we'll try to go find them. But I said to Ted, Ted, it's almost sundown. It's really dicey to fly low and slow over the trees at night because that's when the enemy will shoot, because there's not enough time for the Ravens and the other spotters to bring in bombers and bomb whoever's shooting at us. Ted said, oh, let's go try anyway. And I didn't really want to do this, but okay, he's the aircraft commander. I'm the co-pilot. We'll go. So we go out there. We're flying low and slow over these jungle trees on the southeast corner of the Plain of Jars. And by gosh, if we didn't get laced with a whole burst of AK-47 bullets from some enemy soldiers. Might have been a local friendly soldier who didn't want to be spotted. We don't know. But we got laced full of holes. And several bullets came through the belly of the aircraft, went through the fuel cell, through the floor of the aircraft. And the customer whose handle was Hambone, they all had Hambone and Mule and Skinner and other names. Nobody went by their real name. I did. And so I looked in the back, and this guy Hambone, who was our customer who was looking for his troops, had a chunk about 3 inches long blown out of his shin bone. And he had bled enough that it was kind of like a pile of blood the size of an inverted dinner plate. And he was moaning and groaning in pain because he was really hurt. So anyway, the helicopter continued to fly. Nothing vital was hit. And it was only about 2 miles back to the base. So we went back to the base and landed. And okay, no big deal. The mechanics can repair this real quickly. Nothing else, put corks in it, we'll fly it back to our base at home, and Udor, and they'll fix it there. But they didn't do that. I don't know what they did. So anyway, I'm getting out of the helicopter, and in between us, I had my pilot's clipboard. Where's that thing? And this is what it looks like now. Because the bullet, as it came through the floor of the helicopter, hit my kneeboard, was on the floor between the pilots. I was not wearing it at the time, fortunately. And the bullet went through my kneeboard. It left the jacket of the bullet in that hole, which I have in a jar. And then it continued up and hit me right in the back, right where my heart is. It would have penetrated the seat and would have hurt me, maybe killed me. I don't know. It depends on how fast it was going and where it penetrated my body. But it was right in the heart area. And but then it hit the armor plate. We had armor plated seats, thank you, Jesus. And the bullet skittered between the seat and the armor plate and came out over the overhead. And had to miss my head by about that much, because right above my head was a hole about the size of a grapefruit or a small volleyball, maybe. And it was about as big around in the greenhouse window right above my head. So somehow that bullet went past me, hit the greenhouse overhead, and made a hole big enough to stick my head through. And I fortunately didn't get hurt. But this was another reason why I began to get shaky and began to get worried that I wasn't going to survive if I stayed with Air America. So then when the Estrella thing started happening, it was time for me to go. So I did. And I submitted my letter of resignation, and I had to requested that I not be required to fly for 30 days because I didn't want to fly anymore. So I just had to hang out. Me and my friend Paul, we just hung out and stayed drunk for 30 days and played a lot of darts, drank a lot of beer, chased a lot of women. So we had fun, made fun out of it. And so that was my Air America experience. It was a grand company to work for, and the pay was really good, and the risk was lower until the Estrella missile thing started happening. So, and I really enjoyed learning to fly the Huey. It was a good machine. I think during my 2 years flying H-34s, I had some kind of breakdown or malfunction with my engine or my helicopter or hydraulics or whatever, about once every 6 weeks. With the Hueys for 6 months, I flew Hueys. I never had one malfunction. That was amazing. Huey's an amazing machine. I also just love the old H-34 because I have 4,000 hours in 200 different H-34s in my career. See in the background, I have my H-34D license plate from Idaho. And then right over my left shoulder, or I'm not sure how you're seeing it, there's a certificate. In the year of 2000, we have a reunion. Air America has a reunion every year. We all meet together and swap lives and drink beer and just good camaraderie with most of the guys. Everybody's dying off, of course. But that letter in the year 2000, we had a reunion in Vegas. 2,000 people came because it was open to the public, and everybody brought friends and family because this was a big deal. Because we were told up front that the CIA was going to award us a group medal. And that certificate in the background in the beige paper, that is the commendation from the CIA for the work we did in Southeast Asia. And it says everything and it says nothing. It's all gobbledygook bureaucrat for thank you for what you did, but it doesn't give any specifics about what we did. And then, where's my Air America medal? And he also awarded us a medal. I don't know where my Air America medal is. I thought it was on that display back there. It's just a medallion, and it has on the back of it a number 243. And over the 13 or 14 years of the existence of Air America, 243 people were killed. So that kind of averages about once a month. Someone was killed in different ways. Amazingly enough, you would think flying helicopters for Laos would be very risky, but I kept track the whole time I was there. And during my 30 months there, only one helicopter pilot was killed, and he was shot in the eye going into a friendly zone. But the airplane guys seemed to get shot down and crash on a regular basis. So I felt much better, safer in my helicopter than I would have in airplanes. Overall, it was a fantastic experience, a lot of fun. We had, during that week off every month, we called it a scheduled time off, or STO. We could go anywhere and do anything we wanted, and we had the airline benefits to go anywhere and do anything. I actually flew all the way back to Northern California on for my high school 10th reunion. And I got the prize for coming the furthest. So that was fun. And I got to do a little bragging about being an air charter captain, which I was. And we one flight, we went all the way to Beirut. By the time we got there, we had dates with the stewardesses. When we went to the casino, we went to that fancy Phoenician hotel, went out there and had some nice food. That was way before Big got all blown up. Had a good time there. And then over the many years of meeting all these stewardesses, I have a rather nice black book that I keep in touch with some of my friends. I'm very I don't fool around, but I do like keeping in touch with my dear friends, and it's fun. Let me see, what else can we do? The routine resupply. One morning I was flying H-34s before Hueys, and I was carrying, for some reason, a customer there at this base called 272. They had stacks and stacks and stacks of milk pails, like you'd use to milk a cow with. And I was carrying hundreds of milk pails out to this village, out to the east of 272. It's a very safe area. And I wondered to myself, what in the heck are these people doing with all these buckets? And on the third day, after making my first trip out, I was going eastbound, and the sun was just up, it was first light, and I saw glinting off their grass huts this tremendous reflection. And when we got out there, I took a better look, and what was happening is the CIA case officer had requested corrugated metal for these people to use for roofs, and the CIA supply person had denied that request. So the CIA case officer requested hundreds of buckets. And the people out there were taking the buckets, cutting them open, flattening them out, and using them for roofing. That had to be very expensive roofing. And a little aside that happened while I was there, and that beef stroganoff and the dried milk and the other funny things happened. One day I was flying a co-pilot when I was still checking out, and this guy was flying with a senior instructor, landed in a pig pen. I had no idea. There was a big mother sow with a whole bunch of babies. And those little babies were about the size of a football. and they hopped around like popcorn, jumping in a popcorn bat. It was amazing how agile and athletic those little piggies were. It was just fun to watch them. So fun stuff like that happened. Wasn't all hard work. It wasn't all scary. One day I got to fly an H-34 way up the northwest part of Laos and land at an airstrip that was at 8,000 feet, which is really, really high for a naturally aspirated piston helicopter without a supercharger. It had a supercharger, but not enough to land at 8,000 feet with any kind of weight. But there was a strip there, and I was able to roll it on. It could be a good part about the H-34s had wheels. We could roll it on like an airplane and roll it off like an airplane if we had to, if we were heavy. That really made a big difference. The Huey had to slide the skids. It didn't always work as well. So I don't think ever with Air America did I take off an overloaded Huey. One day I was out in down by Pakse in a very southern part of Laos, and there was some Laotian troops out there holding onto a position on this. It's called the Bolivian Plateau. It was this long, flat, scaling, uprising plateau that terminated in a cliff, and the cliff overlooked the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So the CIA had a base there, and we did a lot of our extracts and inserts from that base because it was right overlooking the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And there were some troops about halfway in between. And resupplying them all day one day, and I took a bunch of stuff out. And then finally at night, they all mobbed onto my helicopter. I couldn't get them off. They were afraid they were going to get overrun that night, and they didn't want to stay there. And I said, my crew chief, throw them out. He says, I am throwing them out, sir, but they're coming in faster than I can throw them out. And I thought about, well, maybe we should shoot them, but no, if we shoot them, then they'll shoot back and then we'll all die. That ain't going to work. So finally, my crew chief managed to stop any more from boarding. And I abused the engine RPM-wise and power-wise. I was able to hop over some trees that were right in front of me and point the helicopter down a gully so I could get lift and fly out of there. And I got back to the base with 33 local troops on board. That was probably the most people I ever carried ever in any helicopter, because they were little bitty guys. Most of them probably weighed 80 or 90 pounds, and I was low on fuel. But still, it was hard to get off with that much of a load at that altitude. That was a challenge, and it was fun to do it. Sometimes I would abuse the machine just because I wanted to do something that needed to be done. One day, the customer at 272 asked me if I could go to a nearby site where there was a sawmill. The local people had a sawmill up on a hillside, and they were cutting down trees and sawing logs for construction, maybe for lumber for sale. I don't know. But the sawmill was done at that place, and the customer asked me if I could move it. Well, I went out and hooked onto it with my external load hook, and it was way too heavy. It probably weighed at least 4,000 pounds. And I was at some altitude and had some fuel, so I was heavy. So I said, okay, I can't do this, but let me go over and see where it's supposed to go to. I'll burn off some fuel. I'll come back and try again. So an airport about 5 miles away where the sawmill was supposed to go. Went over and looked at it and burned off some fuel, came back, tried to lift the sawmill again, and I couldn't. It was broken down to 3 pieces, and I was trying to lift the heaviest piece first. So finally, I got my crew chief I landed at a site right nearby. And I had my crew chief unload everything that was not attached to the helicopter, including himself. And I left him on the ground. I went over and I was able to lift that sawmill and get it off the ground. And I could dive down a hill to get transitional lift so that I could be flying again. And I flew it over to the local airport where they wanted it and dropped it off there. I had a good headwind there for giving me a lift for dropping off. And did. And then went back and got the 2 or 3 other pieces and took them over and put them next to the other piece. And that was challenging. I mean, it probably wasn't supposed to lift anything that heavy. I probably was breaking some rule because we'd have some guys crash because they had been overloaded. When I lifted the thing off, I had a hillside I could dive down so I could get transitional lift and fly like an airplane instead of a helicopter. And that's how I did it. And later, I did 2 more jobs like that where I wanted to lift something that was way over heavy. And I did anyway, just for fun. And one of them was near the site of 272. The powers that be were installing a TACAN, a tactical airborne communication and navigation radio on top of a hill there. And the Army air crane had come in the day before and was trying to do that job. And something happened, and that air crane actually crashed right there on the hilltop and never completed the job. So then the customer came to me and said, "Hey, well, do you think you could lift this Connex box to the top of that hill?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I'll try." So I hooked onto it, and it was too heavy to lift again. But I had an open place in front of me where I could slide it forward until I could get into transitional lift and get going. So I said, okay. So again, I put my crew chief and everything else that was loose, including my co-pilot. At that time, I had a co-pilot, had him get out. And he was all too glad to get out. And so I lifted that box and I just lifted it into the wind. And by the time I made a 360-degree circle, I was on long final for the top of that hill. And I just eased in there very gently and put that big box down right where they wanted it. So that was fun to do. Again, I had a third heavy lift, and I don't remember which one that was, but it's in my book. Read my book. And a lot of fun on our time off. It was everything you've ever said about, everything you've ever heard about airline stewardesses is true. They're smart, they're educated, they're erudite, they're multilingual, they work hard, and when they work hard, they like to play hard. So do we. So we always had a lot of fun with them. Love every one of them. Never had a bad experience. So Hong Kong was fun. Loved Hong Kong. Had a good time in Beirut. Went to Penang at one point. That was kind of boring because there was nothing much there. Went to Hawaii once. I wanted to go to Korea, but my friend Cons didn't want to go to Korea, so we never did that one. And lots of time in Bangkok. That was the good part about Bangkok was when the girls flew in from, they would fly an R&R turnaround. They'd start in Saigon. I think they had a layover in Saigon. Then they would fly back, bring an R&R. Then they would go back to Saigon and would bring another load of troops for R&R. But once we did that, they had 3-day break. So boy, did we have some fun playing with them because they had all this time to play. And we get to know them better. And there was a great bar and restaurant and nightclub in these Intercontinental Hotel right there in Bangkok. And the Intercontinental Hotel was a really good show. A good place to take a date without having to go anywhere. Great food. I loved Thai food. I never ate Thai food while I lived in Thailand because the Air America always had hostels where we stayed. We had American food with American type cooks. And whenever we were on honor base, we had our own on-base restaurants, which had American. And I just never went down to the economy and ate Thai food. So one day, well after I was back in California, went to visit one of my friend Dennis, who was at the party for the radio video. He had married a Thai girl, beautiful young girl, and brought her back to the States, and they created 3 babies, and they had a nice little business. They were doing very well. And when they had their first baby, she had a potluck for the baby's first birthday. I'd never had Thai food, and all of her friends were Thai, and they all brought Thai food. I think I almost died that night because I ate so much I almost popped because the Thai food was so delicious, fresh and homemade from the young Thai women who lived in the Santa Rosa area. Boy, was that fun. So I've loved Thai food ever since. Anybody got any questions? I'm looking for questions.
Yes, sir. We've got quite a few here. And again, guys, he's not lying. There's I mean, there literally we'd be here another 2 hours going through the action and stuff in this book, and he's not lying. There's times where stuff's going all good, everything's fun, relatively no danger, and then all of a sudden, as the saying goes, all hell breaks loose. But like he said,
We
when
call it the shut up the fan.
Yeah,
and that's aviation in general.
Yeah, yes,
everything
sir.
is
Absolutely.
real fine hunky dory. Then what's the old saying? Flying is hours and hours and hours of boredom interrupted occasionally by a sheer panic.
Sheer terror, yes, sir. And
Yeah.
1972 is, as you'll find out in the book, it's a particularly tough year for the plane guys. But Yes. Remember, guys, link in the description for the book. Y'all got to check it out. Wonderful photos also from his many trips. He ain't lying. He had fun with the stewardess. They were out and about enjoying themselves.
Yes, we were.
First question tonight is from Jake B. He's curious if you ever ran into a gentleman named Stephen L. Bennett. He was at Savannah Cat at L39.
Ah, I see that previous picture. Was that him? We
No,
had.
that's just the
Oh, okay.
gentleman's avatar that's
Oh, I see.
commenting.
Well, if I did, I didn't know him by that name. We had the customers all had handles. Like I said, the one guy was Hambo and someone else was Mule and so on. So I would have to know his handle to know if I worked with him. Probably did. He was during that time.
He Jake says Estrella took down his grandfather in 72, so he was a pilot, it sounds
Ah,
like.
oh, no kidding. Late June of 72, not in Laos. Well, maybe, everything was really compartmentalized, so something could happen. Usually when a pilot went down, you heard about it, you got the news, and you knew the details. But June of 72 is about the time, maybe he was in Vietnam instead of Laos. I don't know.
See if he can give us some more comments down here or give us some more feedback down here in the comments. But the next, we've actually got several good ones tonight. Today.
Oh, good.
Mr. Billy messed up and corrected himself. Did Long Tieng actually have an air traffic control, and if so, who operated the air traffic control?
No, we did not. We did not have a tower. We did not have ATC. We just everybody talked on a common frequency. And when you got close in where there was traffic, you announced where you were and what you were doing. And we just looked out for each other.
Wow,
No.
that's pretty amazing considering how busy and the way that airfield was situated.
Yes.
Daniel, did you do troop movements with civilian marked Air America birds?
No, all my birds I flew the H-34s had no markings on them at all, except it had a giant H and a dash and a number. And we called that H-34s the nomenclature was hotel. So there's hotel 55 maybe. I don't know the number of that one. And it was on the tail, a big number on the tail. Might be a number on the nose, but I don't think so. And that was just
I
the
can't
only
see.
markings we had. The
Okey
Hueys
dokey.
all said Air America on them. And the
Yes, I've
interesting part
got.
was, well, I left that part out too, was some of the Air America Hueys were registered in Laos. I think that's, I don't know who that is, but you can see the X-ray W, Foxtrot, something Mike. That was Papa Foxtrot Hotel. Yeah, I've flown that one.
Oh,
And the X-ray whiskey is all aircraft in the United States have a number called November 1234. When you call the tower, you say, "Tower, this is November 1599, whatever." And November is the United States. Every country has a different letter before their number. In Laos, I think they had run out of single letters by the time they got to Laos. So everything in Laos was X-ray whiskey, XW. And in order to fly a Laotian registered aircraft in Laos, I had to have a Laotian pilot's license. So the company got that for me. So in my record here, I have a Laotian pilot's license. Not too many people have those. And I'm sure it's not any good anymore because Laos has changed government since then. So it's probably totally invalid.
let's see here. Uh, Supposedly, Mr. Stephen Bennett. Let's see. Uniform and Air Force. Okay, I'm looking for his picture now to see if I can find it. Medal of Honor recipient Stephen Bennett.
Really? Wow.
I'm looking. I'll do that while we're finishing the next thing. I've got butterfingers on this. Okay, the next question that we have for the evening is nope, just covered that one. Oh, here we go, Daniel again. Did you fly any missions with Air America in Vietnam?
I'm not really. Mostly 99.9% of my work was in Laos. I might have gotten into Vietnam very slightly on one of those inserts and extracts because it wasn't real clear where the border was. And we just put people in where they needed to be or picked them up wherever they were. And I know I did fly across the Ho Chi Minh Trail one day and back, um, but I'm not really sure. I don't think I actually got into Vietnam at all.
Okay. And y'all didn't go any I definitely weren't going down to Cambodia, I presume, from
Actually, I got
Laos.
into Cambodia very briefly one day. We were doing a 4 airplane, 4 helicopter H-34s insert somewhere in Cambodia, not very far south from Pak Se. And we
Oh,
crossed the
wow.
border, and right just south of the border was a little disused airport, triangular shaped. And we all landed there and had another briefing about what we were going to do. And then we took off. And I got about 5 minutes out, and my engine ship warning light came on. So I was the search and rescue. My helicopter was empty. I was supposed to be the search and rescue should someone need rescuing. And because I had a chip light, I went back to the airport and landed, let the engine cool, and pulled the chip light magnet out to see if there was any damage to the engine. There was not. It was just a bit of carbon or water, and the carbon and water will do that. So we put the plug back in. About the time we got the plug back in and got the engine started again, the rest of the guys were coming back, so I just joined up with them and went back home. So yes, I landed in Cambodia, but it was very, very brief and only one time. Never got into Red China. I did get into Burma ever so slightly once, illegally as hell, but um,
Wow.
there was a little finger of Burma that sticks into Thailand. Where's that camera? See that finger?
Mhm.
Little finger of Burma that sticks into Thailand or no, Laos. And I was resupplying the troops way up in the northwest corner of Laos. And I was having to fly all the way around that finger of land because I didn't want to fly over Burma. It's only about 10 miles wide. And so finally, one day I said, oh, heck with it. I'm flying across Burma just to complete this mission to be more efficient. So I did. But then I thought better of it. And I said, oh, I probably shouldn't do that again. And one of my friends, who forevermore shall be known as Burma Ben, was flying up in the same area, and he got up on top of the clouds, and the wind got hold of him and blew him west to the point you didn't know where he was. And then he started getting low on fuel. We've talked about that. And so finally, he looked down through the clouds and he spotted an airstrip. So he went down and landed in Burma. And they kept his helicopter and they impounded him for about 3 weeks before the diplomatic channels finally got him released. So because of that little mistake, he's been known as Burma Ben ever since.
You are not going to believe this, but the man I just showed a minute ago with uh, Vang Pao and Tony Po,
Uh-huh.
uh, he is a MACV-SOG veteran, but he also served over in Thailand with the 46th Company, and I've got a photo of him with. This is going to make you laugh with in Burma Ben's. He's got a lot of great photos with Tony Poe, but this is going to make you laugh. Let me find the photo and let you read this for
Yeah,
yourself.
I'd love to see that. That'd
He
be
had a
great.
few run-ins with the Air America guys. Let me pull it up. Sorry, guys. Here it is. Can you see that?
I had some, not yet. There it is. Yeah. Give me a thumbs up. Oh, yeah.
We just learned how he got his name right there.
Yeah, that's how it happened. Yep.
That's
He's still alive.
absolute.
Still lives in southern Florida. Live in southern Florida somewhere.
I'm gonna leave a
Actually, been
comment right now for Dave since he's online,
uh,
and That's hilarious. I'm glad we just learned about that. He'll get a kick out of that.
Yeah, can you send me that picture just for fun?
I absolutely will. I just
Yeah,
download it and I'll email it to you as soon as we finish up here. We've got a few
cool.
more questions and we'll be wrapped up for the evening. That is so
All right.
neat. I'm glad when history like that ties up and gets itself going like that. That's too cool. Um, Mary Jo, did Air America own the I'm not good Sharon Hotel
I,
in Udorn, and did you
I,
have any personal stories involving the Sharon or
I
Sharon?
I don't know if Air America owned it. I have no idea. Air America was so compartmentalized, they could be doing something on the next block and you wouldn't know who was doing what. So um, I had some personal experiences with this run because it was like the luxury hotel in town. It had a nice
Mhm.
swimming pool. Went over there and swimming a couple of times and went there for drinks occasionally. But it had no need to stay there because it was real fancy and relatively expensive. I had an apartment nearby, so it was a nice hotel though. Yeah, very
Wow,
nice.
interesting. Okay. Um, Bobby B wondering, did Mr. Bill ever cross paths with Jack Meacham? He also flew for the company.
Hmm. I don't know the name. No.
Name sounds
Would be
familiar for
interesting.
some reason.
Yeah, was he a helicopter pilot?
Bobby B, if you are still watching, let us know if Mr. Meacham was a pilot or what he was flying for with the company. Um,
Yeah, I
did you ever talk to any of your other Air America pilots about what they did during their Vietnam War service before coming to America? Do you remember if any guys flew for SOG or in support of SOG?
well, I'm sure we did. I mean, we just did whatever we were assigned at any given time. I remember in my Marine Corps book, I have a picture of a Marine recon team that
Awesome
we took
photo.
out, and the dog was even painted up with camouflage. Took them out, landed them in the woods, and then there were the things called I think they were ninjas. They were black local people dressed in black pajamas, Asians, and I want to call them ninjas, but they were local troops, and we would take them out and drop them someplace in the woods, and they would go sneak into the woods and do their thing. And apparently, they were pretty vicious.
Wow, man.
Yeah,
This will be a very interesting question. What was, in your personal opinion for yourself, what was the spookiest mission that you ever flew for Air America?
I think the one I talked about earlier, where the Raven pilot was shot down on the plain of jars, and we spiraled down to pick him up and found he was dead. There was some, I got a hint somewhere. That guy was pretty afraid of being captured, and he may have shot himself in the head just to keep from being captured. But that's really a shame because we
Mhm.
got there. We had to be almost overhead by the time he got out of his aircraft. He should have been a little more patient, but I don't know if that's true.
That's so sad to think if that was the case. Gosh,
Yeah,
that's mm. Daniel, yeah,
yeah.
must be really scary bailing out of helicopter with those rotor blades spinning around.
Well, it's not as long as the helicopter's cruising along because any drop, I've dropped stuff from helicopters. It goes down fast. So if you jumped out, you'd plummet like a rock. Now, if the helicopter is disabled and it's auto rotating, yeah, that was my worry when I thought I might have to jump out of Ted's aircraft because I was going to step on the skids and push myself away from the helicopter and give a couple of seconds before I pulled the D ring because I didn't want the parachute to go into the rotor system. That would be somewhat of a
God.
disaster for everybody.
Oh,
But I've carried
yeah.
paratroopers before, and they just jump out, and I just basically turn my head and I like to watch because it's scary to watch people jumping out of a perfectly good airplane that's not burning. So
Eh,
yeah,
It looks. I've seen photos of the SOG guys doing H-34 practice jumps, and it is
Yeah,
just awkward to see them jumping out of helicopters like that. It's
yes, it is.
very strange.
Yep. In my
Um,
civilian jobs, I had once where I went to a meet in Bear Valley, California, and it was a combination ski and parajumping contest. So I would carry the people up to about 13,000 feet, and they would jump out with their parachutes. Then they would go ski the ski run where they had to get a total number of points to see who was the best guy. It was crazy to watch. And that in that particular helicopter, it was easier for me to watch him jump out too. Yuck.
wow, I bet that was
I
quite the
never, I
sight to
never,
see.
I never even had to jump out during training. So
Oh, wow! Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
yeah,
Oh, two good questions coming up. Did you
no
have
problem.
any pilots that were captured during your time with Air America?
Not during my time, no. Um, there were some that were shot down and disappeared. Nobody knows for sure what happened to them. They might be prisoners still somewhere in caves in Laos. Who knows? But not that I know of. No. There's one book called "Reported to Be Alive." It was about an Air America pilot who got captured way before my time, and he was with the enemy for several months before they finally traded him for some of their. And he came back in pretty good shape. So at least they didn't take him out and shoot him. So reported to be alive. I forget the author.
Wow. I'll look into that. That sounds like it'd be an interesting read. Um,
Yeah.
Jason, how many different survival weapons did you carry over time in both your Marine Corps flight time and Air America?
As I
We
said
heard.
earlier, with Air America, I carried a Walther P-38 9 millimeter, sawed-off M1 carbine with the stock and the barrel cut off. So it was basically a big pistol with two back-to-back clips. And then I carried the Uzi submachine gun with two back-to-back 9 millimeter clips. That was handy because it took the same bullets as my pistol. And so I could switch around if I had to. But I never had to. I fired the pistol once, I think, just for practice. And I fired, I think, once on that mission we were going out to rescue the pilot where we got called back. I actually test fired my Uzi out the window of the helicopter and scared the hell out of the crew chief because we forgot to warn him. But that's all I ever fired. Never fired a shot in anger in Vietnam or Air America. In Vietnam, I carried a 38 caliber revolver. For some reason, I
That's
decided that was better for pilots.
I never understood that, and then hearing some of the guys that worked with Force Recon or SOG, they get weapons from the SOG or the Force Recon guys because they'd find out that they'd be carrying pistols and be like, if you go down, we can't feel we don't feel right in good conscience having you flying around with just a pistol. So they get a Car 15 or an M16 that had been lost training or what have you.
Oh, good. Yeah. I did a very short tour as a four-door controller in Vietnam for the Marine Corps. And I
Oh
actually
God.
requested an AK-47. I wanted to have an AK-47 because that's what the enemy had. If you're in a firefight with the enemy, that's where you get your ammunition resupplied. Is you go steal it from a dead enemy. But they didn't have any AK-47s in the army, so I took I forget the name of a submachine gun, not an Uzi.
The grease gun,
Grease gun, yes, yes, thanks.
M3.
That was fun. I got again. I didn't get to shoot that in anger, but I did get to shoot a few rounds just for fun one day, and it puts out some good stopping power. Ka-thunk, 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 all
Oh
45
yeah.
caliber.
Oh yeah. That's a great part in book one of your little foray on the ground. That's good. Almost turned deadly though a few
Yeah,
times. That
certainly
was
did several
pretty
times.
hairy. Pretty hairy. These are two good questions. I think we're getting towards the end here. Um, can you talk about how good the aircraft maintenance men were for Air America? Sounds
Well,
like y'all had to be
they
tore up.
were outstanding. There's no other word that's better than just freaking outstanding. And when we went flying, we always took a crew chief with us.
Oh,
And then at the end of it, he would load and unload, help unload, and supervise the loading on the unload and take care of the passengers. He did all that stuff down below. And then every time we stopped for fuel, he'd refuel. And then at night, he'd work on the aircraft as late as he had to make sure everything was perfect for the next day. The rotor head on an H-34 has about 100 grease fittings. He'd climb up there and grease all those grease fittings, and then check all the levels and check all the nuts and bolts and fine tune whatever he had to fine tune. Sometimes they'd work till 2 or 3 in the morning and go flying again the next day. Fortunately, on their long legs, they could catch naps. So, but they were really, really good. Air America had a couple of huge hangars full of American supervised, but most of them they tried to hire locals and train them how to be mechanics, and they were good. The theory was, the rumor was, I never actually saw it, but if an airplane crashed and they couldn't recover it, they would recover the data plate from the aircraft. Just a little piece of metal about the size of a playing card, which shows all the history and serial number of the helicopter. And then the theory was that Air America could actually build a new helicopter around that data plate. I don't know if it actually ever really happened, but they had the capability, I know, of building a brand new aircraft around the data plate from scratch.
Wow.
That way
That
they
is
could show that they lost fewer aircraft that way, because the government for a while got a little ticked off at us for losing so many aircraft. They said, "Stop losing so many aircraft." I think that's where a couple guys got fired after crashing.
Find that funny. Like, here we are fighting a war, and it is secret. I have to give it that, but y'all are complaining about losing aircraft in a war.
And basically, they were expendable anyway. In fact, when the war was over, we put all the H-34s out in the infield of the Air Force Base and burned them.
Oh
That was
gosh,
really
wow.
sad.
That history, I can't even imagine all the history that went up that day. Mm,
Yep.
mm, mm. That's a good question. Jason, how would you like for the legacy of Air America to be remembered in the future?
Well, I think I would like to say that we did a hell of a job. We did a lot of trouble, a lot of work helping the Laotian people fight off the North Vietnamese. And the biggest negative I can come up with is when we signed the peace accords, we just bailed. We just left everybody behind. And I think there are still pockets in Laos of people who are still fighting in the government because they don't like the communist government. And the government calls them bandits and keeps trying to eradicate them, but they keep fighting back. So there's still little skirmishes going on up there all the time, which is really sad. Because
Mm.
during the time when the 300,000 people got displaced, uh, this guy Pop Buell, who was the American who came over with the Peace Corps, he got involved. And one of the things they did is they recruited all of the men from every village between the ages of 16 and 60 and made soldiers out of them. And most of them were killed. Almost an entire population of men from that era in that country were killed by the war. So that was really sad too.
There are a
Did the same.
I mean, and they're not intentionally sad, but it's sad seeing there's a few of really great color photos of some of the young Lao boys or Hmong, whichever tribe they may have been, and they are all of not 8, 9 years old, and they're already have M16s or
Yeah,
CAR-15s in their hands. They're
yeah.
bigger.
I don't know if they
Rifle
were. I don't know if those were actually soldiers or if they were just watching Dad's rifle,
mascot.
or
Yeah, yeah.
along with Dad or what. But yeah, I saw the
Yeah.
young kids. They looked like they were 12, carrying the AK-47, and that was really sad.
Mm, mm, mm. A little bit to end on a little bit of a lighthearted note. What were your thoughts on Air America with Mel Gibson?
If you've ever watched any Charlie Chaplin movies, there's a place where Charlie Chaplin plays a cop. Okay, how does he relate to being a real cop?
Yeah.
How does that relate to Charlie Chaplin if you were a real cop? A total joke. This absolute movie, there was nothing in this movie that was real. It was all Hollywood BS.
I think we spoke about the only thing remotely close was them actually filming a landing that looked somewhat legit, but even that wasn't even filmed anywhere remotely in Laos or anything. So,
No. In the one of the final scenes of that movie, the guy is getting shot down, and he thinks they're gonna find him, so he lands a small airplane and runs it inside the wreckage of an old 123. That is totally,
uh,
absolutely bogus. There's no
uh,
way that could happen. And the
that,
only thing authentic might have been that did show what a lot of our airstrips looked like. They were about 50 feet wide, 600 feet long, and laterite, red laterite. And a lot of them, those airplane pilots were amazing because a lot of these strips were like 30-degree sloped up. They could not, cannot take off into the wind or land into the wind in a situation like that. You've got to land uphill. And it's so steep that once you land, you've got to apply full power to taxi up to the top where it levels off. And that area was where our helipads were. So they would get to the top of the steep hill, and then they would turn around, and then they would either load or unload, whatever they were doing, probably both, unloading local people and then loading some more. And then they would have to take off downhill to get enough airspeed to get flying. And sometimes these dirt strips, not so much the really steep ones, but a lot of them had little dog leg in the middle, so it might turn left or turn right 20 degrees. And some of them had dips or humps in the middle of the 600 feet. So even if you landed on one that had a hump, you couldn't see the other end. And so as you went over the hump, there might be a water buffalo in the way, and you'd kind of hit him because it's not time for him to move. And the guys would always fly over and chase away the water buffaloes or whatever was in the way. Sometimes the water buffaloes would be out on the dirt strips too. Never heard of anybody hitting a water buffalo with an airplane, but it might have happened.
holy
So
moly!
yeah, it was
Wow.
challenging. Those guys were really, really good. Sometimes the latest porter guys would have engine failures, and they would actually be able to land on our helipads. They were so good. They could get those airplanes down if the wind was right. They could touch down and stop before hitting the trees on our helipads. They were excellent pilots, and they had really good machines for that work.
Gosh, that is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on hour 45 here.
All right.
Guys,
Time to bag it.
again, great book here. Please check it out. We've got it in the show notes as well as book 3, which I'm about to start because I've just received it in the mail. And this is going to be covering the next chapter in Captain Collier's life. I'm very excited. It's his adventures back home stateside. And it looks like it's going to have just as much craziness and action-packed stuff as the first 2 books. So I'm excited.
Yep.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we shut down for the evening, Mr. Bill?
Well, initially, when I published my book, I published it as with the title and the subtitle reversed. So it was CIA Super Pilot Spills the Beans. I'm on the edge of reverting back to that just because it's more dramatic. It'll still be the same book. So either way, if you look up Collier Air America, it will come up either way. So yeah, it was fun to write.
And if I was you guys, y'all asked me for book recommendations. If I was y'all and they get the chance, or just go ahead and do it, I would get all 3 in the bunch and the deal that Amazon gives you, because you're not going to go wrong going through the Marines, Air America, and then back stateside post-war years. So, he's actually got the week
during the summer of '72, this war correspondent named Ann Darling came to our base in Udon, Thailand, and she found out where all the pilots hung out, and she went and hung out with them and drank with them, and God knows what else she did with them. But she pumped them for information. Then she wrote a story, the very first issue of We magazine, OUI, it's an offshoot of Playboy, and she wrote this article called Gossip with CIA Super Pilots. And in the name of the article is CIA Super Pilots Spill the Beans. And that's where I came up for my title for my book, A CIA Super Pilot Spills the Beans, just because it was so good to take off. And This is the cover. It's not really a naked girl, but she's pretty close. Anyway,
That
good
is
magazine.
too cool. Too cool. I'm glad to see you've actually got the edition there. I was hoping you did. That makes it all
Yeah,
that
I
much better.
managed to find it on eBay.
Wow, that's too cool.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, guys, go ahead and jump out and get those first two, and get
Yes,
this third
please.
one as well, and start reading with me and getting ready for May when we have him back to cover book 3. Mr. Bill, is that you? We pretty much covered it for tonight.
I think we have. Yes. Thank you very much.
All righty, guys.
Enjoy.
Well, y'all be good, and we'll be in touch and let y'all know ahead of time when we're coming out with show number 3. So we'll see y'all later.
All right.